Merritt Dade pulled a chain tight across Lydia Voss's forge doors while 48 horses crowded the snowy street. "The note came due at noon," he called. "The forge belongs to a man who can keep it open." Lydia stood at the threshold in her leather apron, broad-shouldered and full-figured, with a hammer in one hand and the last warm horseshoe in the other. "My customers' horses are inside, Mr. Dade. Take your chain off my door." Dade snapped the padlock shut. A bay mare slipped behind Lydia and struck one knee against the rail. Wade Hollis swung down to catch her. He was the trail boss responsible for every remount in the street, and the mountain road was closing. He looked at the chain, then at Lydia. "Can you keep them standing on Blackstone Grade?" "If I can reach my forge." Wade lifted a short-handled sledge. Lydia caught his wrist, set the chain against the stone sill with her tongs, and pointed to one link. "There. One blow. Clean." The sledge fell. The link split, the chain dropped, and the street went quiet. Dade's smile vanished. "You just cost him his federal contract." Lydia pushed the doors open. Her coal bin had been emptied, her iron rack stripped bare, and snow lay beneath the rear window. Someone had chained the forge after robbing it, and the blizzard was already coming over the ridge. Lydia crossed the cold floor once, fast, counting what remained. 2 bundles of shoe nails, a half bar of iron, the small stake anvil her father had carried on cattle drives, 48 remounts outside, plus the teams that would need Blackstone Grade before nightfall. She turned to Wade. "Bring me the worst 6 first. Tell your men to pull every loose wagon tire they can spare." Dade stepped into the doorway, as if the broken chain still gave him authority. He was a narrow man in an expensive buffalo coat, with gray at his temples and gloves too clean for the yard. 6 months earlier, he had bought the note on the Voss forge from the Territorial Bank. For 5 months, Lydia had met every payment. Then her father died. 2 ranch accounts came late, and Dade refused the partial sum she placed on his desk that morning. "Anything you make in here is mine," he said. "The order gives you the building pending a hearing," Lydia answered. "It does not give you other men's horses, my customers' iron, or the right to empty a coal bin before possession." The deputy beside Dade shifted his feet. He had served the notice because the circuit judge would not reach Broken Spur until Monday. The deputy had no warrant to search Dade's warehouse, and no wish to decide property law in a snowstorm. Dade noticed the hesitation. "Arrest them both for breaking the seal." "There was no court seal," Lydia said. "There was your padlock." Wade handed the sledge back to Dade's driver. "My name is Wade Hollis. If you want damages for one chain, send the bill to the Remount Company office in Cheyenne. Your horses are due at the fort by midnight tomorrow. Miss the delivery and your bond is forfeit." Wade's jaw tightened. That bond was every dollar he had saved in 9 years of driving other men's stock. Lydia saw the truth in his face before he hid it. "Then you ought to get your animals to another smith," she told him. He crouched beside the fallen bay and ran a hand down the mare's left foreleg. Her shoe was worn flat, and ice already shone on the street where packed snow had thawed and frozen again. "The other smith Dade hired put summer plates on 3 teams this morning," Wade said. "One went down by the freight office. You told me last week this mare would need heel cocks before the first hard freeze. I should have listened." Lydia put the warm shoe she still carried against the mare's hoof, checked the fit, and drew it away before it could scorch. "Listening now will cost you more." "So will burying a horse on Blackstone Grade." That was the first thing he said that made her look at him twice. She had known Wade Hollis by reputation, careful with stock, spare with words, and too independent to remain long in any cattle outfit. He was 39, tall without looming, his shoulders made by work instead of display. Snow clung to his dark hair. A pale scar crossed the edge of his beard. He watched her hands rather than her figure, and when he moved closer, he waited for her to give him room. Lydia pointed toward the side yard. "Build me a windbreak from those freight doors. Leave 6 feet around the fire trench, no canvas near sparks." He nodded once and went to work. By 1 o'clock, the yard behind the forge had become an open-air smithy. Wade's men stood 2 heavy doors on edge and braced them with wagon tongues. Lydia set the stake anvil into a stump. Old Mrs. Bell from the boarding house arrived with 2 sacks of charcoal left from summer cooking. A wheelwright brought 3 cracked iron tires that could be cut and drawn into bars. None of it was ideal. All of it could serve. Lydia's younger brother Peter worked the bellows. At 19, he was quick and loyal, and he still believed speed could solve what patience could not. Lydia caught him reaching for a red bar too early. "Wait for yellow at the edge," she said. "Red will split when you turn it." He pulled his hands back. She shaped the first winter shoe while snow gathered in her auburn braid. The work forced the noise out of her mind. Heat, color, weight, strike. She left the toe smooth, raised the heels, and drew short caulks that would bite without bruising the hoof. When the shoe met the bay mare, it sat level. "Easy, girl. You only have to trust the ground once." The mare set her foot down. Wade led her across the frozen patch beside the rail. She did not slide. The watching hands gave a low murmur. Lydia did not smile. One safe step was an answer, not a victory. Merritt Dade returned before she finished the second horse. This time he brought the town's new smith, Orson Bale, and 2 wagons loaded with coal and iron from Lydia's empty bins. "You can purchase fuel from me," Dade said. "Cash. Triple rate." Peter swore beneath his breath. Lydia set her hammer down. "You carried that through my rear window before you chained the front. I protected property attached to my security. Coal burns. It is not attached to anything." Dade smiled at the small crowd. "This is why sentiment should not run a business. Her father understood debt. His daughter understands drama." The insult landed exactly where he meant it to. Amos Voss had taught Lydia the forge from the time she was 12, but when customers praised her work, they had often praised her father's judgment for allowing it. After he died, the same men began asking who would take over. Lydia had buried him, opened the doors the next morning, and never missed a delivery. Until 2 ranchers delayed payment after an early cattle loss. She could have answered Dade with every bruise and burn on her hands. Instead, she reached into her apron and placed $3 silver on the stump. "Fair price for 2 sacks of my coal. I will argue ownership Monday. Today I need heat." Dade swept the coins into the snow. "Triple rate or the fire goes out." Wade moved before Peter did. He stepped between the young man and Dade, keeping both hands open. "Pick up her money." "You cannot order me in my own yard. This is her yard until a judge says different." Dade glanced at the remounts and lowered his voice. "Take your herd east now, Hollis. Bale will shoe the leaders. I will sign that the delay was hers and the fort may spare your bond. Stay beside her, and I will make certain the quartermaster knows you broke a creditor's lock." Wade looked toward the ridge. The sky above it had turned the color of hammered lead. He had perhaps 7 hours before snow swallowed the road, and more horses than Lydia could fully shoe with the iron left. "I heard you," he said. Then he bent, found Lydia's $3 in the snow, wiped each coin on his sleeve, and returned them to her palm. At 2, a ranch wife named Cora Penn arrived in a cutter with her 8-year-old son wrapped in quilts. Her husband had broken his ankle beyond Blackstone Grade. The doctor had said it, but fever had come that morning. Cora needed to reach the rail station for medicine waiting on the afternoon freight. Orson Bale had shod her mare with flat plates before Dade sent him to the Voss yard. On the first icy turn, the animal had gone to its knees. "I cannot take her up the grade like this," Cora said. "Can you fix it?" Lydia looked at Wade's line of remounts. Every minute she gave Cora moved his contract closer to ruin. Wade read the choice in her face. Do the mare. Your deadline, a government officer can count money. A sick man cannot bargain with a fever. It was a costly answer, offered without performance. Lydia pulled Cora's mare under the windbreak. The work revealed how thin their resources had become. Lydia could reshape Bale's plates, but she needed iron for the rear pair. She took the half-bar meant for Wade's lead horse and cut it in two. When she finished, she walked the mare herself over the frozen lane. Cora's son watched from the cutter, his small face pale above the quilts. Will she fall? He asked. She may stumble, Lydia said. Any horse can. These shoes give her a fair chance to catch herself. The boy considered that and nodded. Lydia liked him for accepting an honest promise. Cora drove north toward the station. Before the cutter passed the church, Dade called after her that the Blackstone Road would be closed by sundown. Sundown? Wade asked. Dade's eyes shifted. The territorial road crew had not yet announced a closure. Their foreman was still setting snow poles above town. But Dade knew the hour, and he knew it before the man responsible had spoken. Lydia watched the coal wagons turn toward Dade's warehouse. One carried Blacksmith stock from her forge. The other carried sacks marked for the 3 ranches west of Blackstone. How many cattle notes did you buy this summer? She asked. Dade stopped. That is none of your concern. You knew the road would close because you paid to have it closed early. The ranchers missed the last rail sale, their winter notes come due, and you buy cattle for half value. Wade's expression changed. My remounts are not the only stock you need trapped west of the grade. Dade's public mask thinned. Snow closes roads. Debt closes businesses. I did not invent winter. No, Lydia said. You only bought every shovel and horseshoe you thought people would need to survive it. That was the midpoint of the day and the moment the locked forge became something larger. Dade had not chosen Lydia because he believed she was weak. He had chosen the forge because it controlled movement. Without winter shoes, draft teams could not climb the grade, ranchers could not reach the rail siding, and Wade's remounts could not reach the fort. The debt was lawful. The monopoly built around it was deliberate. Lydia could not prove bribery before the judge arrived. She did not need to solve every crime before nightfall. She needed to keep the road alive. She drew a rough list on a pine board with chalk. Cora's mare was gone. Wade had 47 horses still needing work, but only 12 had to lead or hold wagons on the grade. The ranch teams needed 16 animals. The road crew needed 4. Shoe 32 correctly. Rotate them through the most dangerous work. And the rest could follow on level stretches or remain sheltered in town. We stopped trying to finish one herd, she said. We build a road team. Wade studied the list. Shared leaders. And shared wheel horses. Every ranch contributes iron, charcoal, labor, or feed. Nobody buys passage from Dade. Nobody owns the team. Peter grinned. He will hate that. That is not a reason to do it. It is a pleasant extra. For the first time that day, Lydia laughed. Word moved faster than the storm. Ranchers brought broken harrow teeth, worn wagon rims, and the iron straps from a collapsed shed. The road crew contributed a sled load of charcoal. Mrs. Bell fed the fireworkers stew from a copper pot. Orson Bale stood beside Dade's coal wagon for nearly an hour, watching Lydia reject metal that would crack and accept pieces that could be worked. Then Bale removed his apron and crossed the yard. I will strike if you tell me where, he said. Lydia looked at his hands. They were skilled hands, though his pride had made them careless that morning. You follow my heat and my pattern. He nodded. Dade shouted that Bale would never work in the territory again. Bale picked up a sledge anyway. The open-air forge became a line of motion. Lydia judged and shaped. Bale struck. Peter drove nails. Wade and his hands held horses, changed teams, and kept frightened animals away from sparks. By 4, Lydia's cheeks glowed with heat while snow melted along the shoulders of her deep blue wool dress. Her full arms worked steadily beneath rolled sleeves. When her back cramped, she braced both palms on the stump and breathed through it. Wade appeared beside her with coffee. 3 minutes, he said. 2. 3, or I tell Peter you have lost count. She gave him a tired look. That would be a lie. Then save my soul and drink. She took the cup. Their fingers touched, and neither pretended it had not happened. You should take your best horses east, she said. If you leave now, you may save part of the contract. And leave the road team short? You have spent 9 years building that bond. He leaned against the freight door, close enough to shelter her from the wind without crowding her. 9 years ago, I drove 6 horses through an ice storm because a company man said the schedule mattered more than the team. 2 animals died. I signed the report that called it weather. I have been paying for that sentence longer than I have been saving money. Lydia saw the shame he carried and the boundary he had built from it. You cannot buy them back by losing everything, she said. No, but I can refuse to make the same choice with different horses. She handed him the empty cup. Then stay. Hold the gray gelding next. He bites when frightened. Wade's mouth bent at one corner. That sounded almost tender. It was for the horse. Naturally. At 4:30, the deputy returned with a written order from the road foreman. Blackstone Grade would close at 6. Any convoy west of the upper marker after that hour would be turned back. The road foreman came behind him, furious. He had never set 6 as the hour. Dade had added the time after bribing a clerk to copy the notice. The foreman could withdraw the false order, but the real storm made delay dangerous. They had 90 minutes. Dade had finally taken a step he could not explain as debt collection. The deputy looked at Lydia's empty coal bin, Dade's loaded wagons, and the altered notice. Mr. Dade, you will remain in town until the circuit judge arrives. Dade climbed onto his wagon instead. You have no warrant to hold me. He whipped the team toward the east road. 1 coal wagon followed. The second, overloaded with iron, struck a frozen rut and tipped across the mouth of the Blackstone Road. Its tongue splintered. 2 frightened draft horses went down in tangled harness. Dade did not stop. He cut his saddle horse loose from the rear and rode east, leaving his driver beneath the overturned seat. The road was blocked. The storm was half an hour closer, and the only heavy team able to drag the wagon clear belonged to Wade. If Wade used those horses, he would spend the last of the daylight saving the man who had threatened him. If he did not, nobody would reach the grade. Lydia was already running toward the wreck. The driver had one leg pinned under the seat frame. Lydia dropped to her knees in the snow and pushed her shoulder beneath the wood. It did not move. Wade arrived with 2 hands and a pry bar. Harness the bays to the rear axle, Lydia told him. Low pull, no jerking. Peter, cut the left trace when I say. The wagon groaned as the bays took weight. Lydia watched the iron load, the angle of the wheel, and the trapped man's face. If the load shifted downhill, it would crush him. Hold, she called. Wade stopped the team at once. Lydia crawled close enough to see the broken reach beneath the wagon. She wedged her stake anvil under it, then drove the discarded chain link from her forge between wood and iron. The link she had wanted thrown away became a shim. Again! 1 step! The bays leaned. The frame lifted. Peter cut the trace, and Lydia dragged the driver free by his coat. The wagon settled without rolling. The driver's leg was broken, but he was alive. He caught Lydia's sleeve before they carried him to Mrs. Bell's. Dade told me to empty your bins last night. Said the court paper covered all of it. I knew it did not. I did it anyway. "Tell the deputy when you can speak without fainting," Lydia said. His grip tightened. "He paid Finch to write 6 o'clock on the road order. Finch has the money in the dispatch box." There would be testimony. There would be a hearing. For the moment, a wreck still barred the road. Lydia walked around the wagon and studied the load. Dragging it upright would take too long. Unloading every bar would take longer. "Roll it farther," she said. The road foreman stared at the ditch below. "We will lose the wagon." "The wagon is already broken. Roll it into the ditch, recover the iron after the storm, and open the road." The deputy looked toward town, where Dade's property clerk stood watching. "That load may be evidence." "Then witness where we put it. 30 people can tell the judge. A blocked road will become 30 graves if we preserve evidence more carefully than lives." The deputy made the decision. "Open the road." Wade hitched 4 remounts to the upper side. Lydia set men with ropes so the wagon could not swing back. At her signal, the team pulled. The wheels rose, hung for one breath, then the wagon rolled into the ditch with a thunder of iron and snow. The Blackstone road stood open. They had 46 minutes. Lydia assigned the road team in pairs. Sure-footed leaders at the front, heavy wheel horses behind each loaded wagon, fresh remounts rotated every mile. Cora Penn had returned from the station with medicine, but the storm had caught her before the lower grade. Her cutter joined the center of the convoy, protected between 2 ranch wagons. Wade wanted Lydia in the first wagon. "You have been at the fire for 5 hours," he said. "Your hands are shaking." "I know which shoes were made from which iron. If one fails, I need to know before the next team reaches the same ice." "Peter knows the marks." "Peter knows the marks. I know the horses." Wade held her gaze. The wind pulled dark hair across his forehead. Every protective instinct in him asked to put her somewhere safer. Respect required a harder answer. "Ride beside me, then. If you say stop, the whole line stops." "Agreed." They climbed Blackstone Grade in a moving wall of snow. The road twisted between dark pines and a drop that vanished into white. Lydia rode the bay mare she had shod first. Wade kept his horse half a length downhill from hers, close enough to block a fall and far enough to leave her rein free. At the first ice shelf, the lead team shortened stride but held. At the second, a rear horse slipped, caught itself on a heel caulk, and stood trembling. Lydia dismounted, ran her hand down the leg, and changed that horse with a fresh one. No speech, no crowd, only work continuing because 30 people trusted her judgment. Halfway up, a gust struck the pen cutter broadside. The mare shied toward the drop. Cora pulled the rein, the cutter slewed, and one runner slid over the road edge. Wade turned his horse, but Lydia was closer. She drove the bay across the cutter's nose, forcing Cora's mare to turn uphill. The bay's new shoes bit into the ice. For one terrible second, Lydia felt both animals slide beneath her. Then the caulks caught. "Rope!" she shouted. Wade threw a loop around the cutter rail. Men on the upper side hauled while Lydia held the mare's head against her shoulder. Cora's son made no sound beneath the quilts. His eyes stayed on Lydia. The cutter came back onto the road. Lydia checked the harness, then crouched beside the boy. "Remember what I told you?" "She might stumble," he whispered, "and the shoes help her catch herself." That is exactly what she did. The convoy moved again. They crossed the upper marker 3 minutes before 6. The road crew closed the gate behind the last wagon. Beyond the grade, the land dropped gently toward the rail siding and the fort road. Cora drove for her husband's cabin with medicine beneath her seat. The ranchers reached the siding before the stock pens closed. Wade's remounts could not make Fort Laramie by midnight. But the road foreman and deputy signed a statement that weather, obstruction, and public rescue had caused the delay. It might save his bond. It might not. Wade accepted the paper without asking Lydia to praise him for the risk. They returned to Broken Spur after dawn, exhausted and white with frost. Merritt Dade was waiting in the deputy's office. He had been stopped at the East Bridge after his driver gave a statement. Finch, the bribed clerk, had surrendered the altered road notice and the marked bills in his dispatch box. The circuit judge arrived Monday on the delayed train. He did not settle every debt in one dramatic hour. He did suspend Dade's possession order because Dade had removed disputed property before taking lawful possession, altered a public notice, and attempted to use the road closure for private advantage. The forged note remained real. Lydia still owed it. She faced that truth before a room full of ranchers. One by one, the people who had crossed Blackstone Grade paid their overdue accounts. The road commission paid for 32 winter shoes and the emergency road team. Cora Penn paid $2 and promised the rest after calving season. Lydia accepted the $2 and wrote the balance in her ledger. She would not turn gratitude into charity or charity into ownership. The total covered the missed payment, the next month's installment, and coal enough to keep the forge open through Christmas. Orson Bale asked to rent the second anvil instead of taking the forge from her. Lydia gave him a 30-day trial and put the terms in writing. Peter became responsible for inventory, with every bin checked by 2 people at closing. The Road Commission adopted a winter registry of shod-led teams so no single creditor or merchant could close the grade by controlling one forge. Dade lost his warehouse contracts. The altered notice and bribery charge went to the territorial court. His creditors seized the cattle notes he had meant to use against other men. Broken Spur did not cheer when he was taken east for arraignment. The town simply stopped moving aside for him. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from Fort Laramie. Wade's bond would stand. The quartermaster had accepted the deputy's statement and, more importantly, all 48 remounts had arrived sound. Wade carried the letter to Lydia's forge at closing time. She was fitting a new wooden handle to the short sledge he had used on Dade's chain. "You kept it," he said. "You returned it. That showed judgment." He leaned against the open door. The winter sun caught the lines beside his eyes. "I have another drive in March." Lydia continued sanding the handle, though she had already made it smooth. "Do the horses need shoes?" "Eventually. Their trail boss would like supper first." She looked up. "Is this a business proposal?" "No, I know better than to hide one thing inside another with you. I am asking whether I may court you. Slowly, if that is your preference. Publicly, if that is your boundary." Lydia set the sledge on the bench. She had spent most of her life being treated as too much woman for delicate rooms, and somehow not enough woman to inherit a man's work. Wade had not praised her by denying either truth. He had watched her choose, trusted the choice, and paid a cost without presenting the bill to her heart. "Supper first," she said. "March can answer for itself." Relief warmed his weathered face. Before they left, Lydia picked up the broken chain link she had used beneath the overturned wagon. She heated it, opened it, and drew the ends into 2 plain hooks. One she fixed beside the forge door for Wade's coat. The other she fixed lower for her leather apron. The chain that had closed her business now held 2 things belonging to people free to leave. Neither of them reached for a coat.